My name is Jay Vroom. I'm President and CEO of CropLife America and Chairman of CropLife Foundation. I'm pleased to have the role of welcoming everyone to this media event on behalf of the Foundation's Crop Protection Research Institute and a new study and report that CPRI's Executive Director Leonard Giannessi will be unveiling here today. We're pleased to be here really and truly on behalf of the crop protection industry worldwide, and it's especially pleasing for us today at CropLife Foundation here in Washington, D.C. to be sharing this new report that will illustrate, we believe, the enormous impact that modern weed control technology could have on improving the lives of people, particularly women and children in sub-Saharan Africa, while increasing crop production. Leonard will now be giving his presentation on the report.
Several years ago, I was asked by CropLife International to organize worldwide information on pesticide uses, and I was really intrigued by what I was reading about in Africa, because the literature over the last 40 years has been pretty consistent. The weed problem is bad, it's getting worse, herbicides can make a world of difference. I'm going to address this topic of solving Africa's weed problem as a way of increasing crop production, and I might say dramatically increasing crop production and improving the lives of women. And this is how weeds are removed from fields in Africa before planting. You've got women and children out in the fields with hand tools going across the field to get the weeds off before planting the crop. 60 hours per hectare is our estimate of what's involved to clear the fields of weeds before planting. The typical farmer is spending half of her time as a farmer pulling weeds out of fields. And one of the reasons you have a lot of urban migration away from farming in Africa is that this drudgery is something that kids are walking away from. Half of their time, just think about what they could do with their time if they weren't weeding. And it's increasingly females that are doing the weeding in Africa. The estimates we have are that well above 90% of the weeding for most crops is done by women in Africa. And one thing I can tell you about hand weeding is that it permanently deforms women's spines. You see these women, they're bent almost in half. And you see the factoid in this slide. To weed 1 hectare of a crop, a woman walks 10 kilometers in this bent position. And we know that it permanently deforms spines because this issue was studied in California. And the state of California in the United States has banned the practice of hand weeding. And there's not enough time in the day, and there are not enough workers to do the weeding that needs to be done where the farmer is still just planting crops on her fields. And so weeding is not done at the optimal time, and the farmer practice is always partial weeding. This explains the crux of the problem in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a labor bottleneck problem. And so you could say that the weeds are the biggest constraint on African crop production. It determines the size of the fields that are planted to crops. One of the unfortunate side effects of the need for labor for weeding is that many children are pulled out of schools by their parents. The parents really don't want to do this, but the weeds have to be controlled. And so 69% of the kids between 5 and 14 are forced out of schools during these periods where they require weeding time. So right away, you can see the potential impact of herbicides in saving the farmer labor. And what's the impact here? Well, there were 2 hours per hectare needed to apply that herbicide instead of the 60 hours that would have been needed to pull all the weeds out of that field so the crop could be planted. Potential impacts of herbicide use in Africa, we think you would see a 20 to 50% increase in crop production just because of better weed control on the fields that are currently planted. Weed control and improving weed control is the key to improving those yields. The yields in Africa have been stagnant, far less than what they're achieving on experimental plots. We think you have to solve the weed problem to really improve things. So we do have quantitative answers and estimates in our press release and in the report. Just to repeat those for you, what we think the potential is of solving the weed problem. We think you'd see like a 30% increase on the fields that are currently planted. That's 30 million tons per year of increased food and crop production. We think there'll be a reduction in the drudgery of women hand weeding of 24 billion hours a year. We think that's about a 90% reduction in drudgery, freeing up those hours for other activities. And we think that this technology could positively influence the lives of 135 million women.